El doctor Luis Alejandro Pulido es el que nos va a hacer el favor de hacer la presentación desde el principio. Entonces, listo, Sepa, ya estamos. Tú nos das la cuenta. ¿Qué pasó?
Uno. Ahora.
Okay. Adelante, Alex.
Recording in progress.
Muy buenos días. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fifth session of the second International Tuberculosis Virtual Forum 2021. We want to remind everyone and the panelists and attendees that this session is being recorded and is being streamlined on Zoom and simultaneously on Facebook, YouTube, and the image to be posted. For more information, you can check the REMI-TB website, which is www.remitb.org, to get more information on the forum, and also the broadcast of this forum receives support from the UBC University. We want to thank all of those people for their great support. This forum is being done with the support of other institutions as well, the Science School through the internationalization by the UBC, also the Border Health Board of Mexico-US, REMI-TB, as well as the National Center for Preventive CCCs by the Mexican government, Senaprese, and also for the Network for Investigation in Mexico, TB Prevention in Mexico. I want to say the purpose of the forum is to create scientific innovation and biomedical collaboration at international level regarding the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of TB under the new COVID-19 framework. With this, we have to be ready for possible potential future pandemics. I want to remind everyone who's listening to us, we're gonna issue approval of attendance if you have been here for at least 5 sessions, and then you have to sign in through the QR code that will be projected during the session. Today, we're gonna have the participation of 2 great speakers. First, we're gonna have Dr. Magnolia Arango, and then we'll have Dr. Lucia Álvarez. So we're gonna have the first presentation by Dr. Arango, and then we're gonna have a Q&A session. We're gonna have 40 minutes for the presentation itself and about 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. Okay, let me introduce Dr. Arango to you. She's a pediatric pneumologist by the National University of Colombia. She's also a member of the regional TB group in Colombia. She's also the counseling board for the tuberculosis control and the Ministry of Health. And she's a member of the regional TB group for children and adolescents and teenagers by the Pan American Health Organization. And she had the presentation regarding the challenges of TB in childhood and adolescence. Thank you everyone for the generous invitation. To me, it's a true pleasure and I'm honored to be here with you, to be here in such an important forum. I would like to know if you can hear me, if everyone can hear me, if you can see the presentation on the screen. Could you please let me know? Can you hear me? Yes, of course we can hear you. Perfect. Excellent. Okay, we're gonna start now. After expressing how grateful I am for the invitation to such an important forum, I want to thank Dr. Muñiz and Dr. Salazar and all the institutions that are behind this big effort that are allowing us to be here. So this is a challenge of tuberculosis in childhood and adolescence. I gave it this title because every time we see a child that may have TB, then we are facing a big challenge in the diagnosis. And now that we know all the data and the numbers that we get from the previous conferences and the dramatic situations that are being experienced around the world due to TB, now I would like to remind everyone that there's approximately 1,200,000 children per year around the world. Around 225 die. Most of them are children that are sick and they die. Most of them are under 5 years old, and it represents about 700 children per day. And of course, we have co-infection cases of multi-resistance TB, drug-resistant TB, and the major concern is there are many children under 5 years of age that are not detected, and TB has been a silent pandemic here in the shades because it's been underestimated and misunderstood. And even though we have had great advancements in children's survival, it's not reflected in TB, and this is a major concern for everyone. And it's a major concern for the Pan American Health Organization. I remind you that Mycobacterium tuberculosis is one of the 10 most frequent respiratory pathogens in pediatric age, and there are over 10 million orphans due to TB, because there are many women who may have tuberculosis, up to 2,900,000 estimated cases with a very high mortality rate. And in 5 years, at least 1 million children, even more, will die if we don't do all the control activities to overcome this situation. And beyond just being a medieval pandemic, it's remember that high percent of the population, the world population, will be infected by TB. Over 90% occur in the first year of infection. And it means that in children below 5 years of age, we're not collecting the right information, and we are not capturing these patients as we should do. Most of them develop TB in the first 2 to 5 years of infection. And in risk groups, there is a high probability of an active TB progression with the accumulated risk of up to 20%. So it's important to remember the LTB concept. We cannot forget that besides the home, we can catch this infection in nurseries, in schools, and in waiting rooms, in hospitals for children below 5 years of age, and also children with HIV or malnourished, or that they spend time with infected adults in orphanages and other institutions. Situation in Mexico, according to the information being provided, is 0 to 19 years of age. It's about 9% of the load, and we're talking about 1,455. Out of those below 15 years of age, 530, and in Baja California, the incidence is very important, 22,000 out of every 100,000. I'm not going to elaborate on this. I'm just going to show you how the COVID pandemic has had a very negative impact on TB detection. And here we can see from the previous year and to this year how it dropped significantly the number of detected cases and contact studies. So there are some risk factors and vulnerable groups for TB that we know. They're very well known. There's many, but among this vulnerable population, I want to highlight the population for children below 5, because one of the most affected population. This graph is very well known too. Is to remind us that for tuberculosis, we need to have an interaction between the bacillum, the situation of the host, and obviously the socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental factors. And for children, it is a reflection of the prevalence in adults of a sentinel event that indicates an active transmission, recent and progressive transmission of the bacillus, and represents a bacillus environment that has not been timely detected. TB obviously is a result of a change of inequities. A child with TB is a clear sign of the failure of the entire system, not only the system, the health system, but every system, and also the search and the screening, detection, and diagnostic of TB is going to have a great impact on the control. The children below 5 are high risk. And we need to highlight that the younger the kid, the higher the probability of infection, disease, and death. That 50% of exposed children are infected, 25% develop to more serious diseases, conditions, or they die. And children under 2 years of age, malnourished adolescents, and immunity deficient children, they face higher risk, because the children, some of them face the risk, frequent risk factors that are people are more exposed to in the early age. They have it's very hard to find good samples for the detection, and then sometimes the tests are not very efficient, and we're going to discuss that later. Regarding the susceptibility of adolescents, we're talking about young people between 15 to 19 years of age. It's an important cause, non-acknowledged for death. And this type of patients, they have an increase of risk of to develop TB as adults. They can be infectants with more bacilliferous forms, but there is not enough data. They broke it down by age, and these young people, they add by peer pressure because of a stigma. They may have comorbidities, and all this make them more vulnerable, especially those that suffer some kind of addiction, that they're detained or they're homeless. And so these health services were not ready to address the situations. The Pan American Health Organization and the WHO emphasizes that to have infection and disease, you need to be present some risk factors: intradomiciliary contact, the age below 5, living in high incidence areas, immunosuppression, serious malnourishment, vulnerability given for margination, living in crowded households, and people who live on the streets, and people who are in jail or refugees. And this also graph that is very well known by everyone is might help us remind us that we have a very large universe. Out of those, very high percentage get infected. A big number have an active TB, and tuberculosis can be detected in children at a very relatively small number. And we also have an additional situation, and is that the clinic symptoms are compatible with other conditions. So on the other side, latent TB, that it's developed to active TB. In children, it's a continuous process that sometimes is difficult to differentiate from other conditions. And of course, we know the long TB and the rest of all the different forms, inflammatogenous, extra pulmonary, and they're very important. And we have seen some old data from 2019. These data are a little old, so we need to remind that there are all different forms of TB, and the pulmonary or lung TB is the most prominent in Mexico. So lung TB, we need to remember that in children, the chronic cough, fever, anorexia, sweatings, hematosis, and other typical symptoms for adults, it's very rare to see this in children. So being lung TB, the most frequent in Mexico, we need to remember that the clinics is very specific. It's variable, and depending on the compromise, and we have some other symptoms. For instance, in case we see cough and fever for more than 8 years, loss of weight or not gaining of weight, and those are some of the factors that can be taken into consideration. Where can I show you here an apparent pneumonia, as you can see, another disseminated process at a pulmonary type, unilateral affectations, and extrapulmonary is forms. We need to remember that there are different subgroups, and occurs in the 10 to 42% in the patients. Depending on many factors, and it's suspected that in systemic manifestations, asthenia, fever, anorexia, and so on, and all these symptoms and signs are common or shared with other diseases. And we need to remember the miliary TB, that this serious lymphomatogenous dissemination can kind of plant seeds in in any of the organs. It has also clinic diagnostics on very specific. We might remember that in younger children, up to 50% of children may develop in miliary TB. They can develop meningitis, the gland form, sometimes very evident, and sometimes we only see them as a finding when we do the X-ray study on the thorax of the child, and we have seen mass formations on the neck. And also the forms for central nervous system TB, when you have meningoencephalitis, tuberculosis, as you can see. We can see several tuberculosis. And the importance of this is not only the suffering of the child during the disease, but the child may die. And if they don't die, they might have some side effects, permanent side effects. So also the osteoarticular joint TB may have a long focus up to 75%. It represents about 20% of all TB-EP. And they are most frequent on all the joints that support the weight, mostly in mono joint situations. So, and I'm not going to read all this because we don't have much time, but we need to remember that there is not a single organ in the body that is protected against tuberculosis forever. So there are some very sad cases. In this ingenious child, she was a girl, she was 9 years old. She came with brain compromise, but due to meningeal cause. And when we identified that she had high hydrocephaly with an affectation in the white liquid, with some affectations in the meninges section, and with tuberculosis, and we can see that she had some injuries in the meninges. And also she has compromised the quadriceps and the coxofemoral joint with bilateral synovitis. So these are very sad situations, very dramatic situations that what they're telling us, and is that TB may be very serious, and for children in particular, they can come to this situation, and she after treatment she's still suffering from several side effects. So we have some microbacteriosis, TB. It can be expressed and shown in for different signs. So we also need to remember that TB in infants, we need to remind that this is very different in adults, but also need to remember that's a big risk, because for mothers who are bearing children, they can transmit the disease even to the fetus. Neonatal TB, that unfortunately is increasing around the world, and it has a high mortality and morbidity rates, and it should be part of the differential diagnosis. And for many of the different cases we see on a daily basis, what are the diagnostic criteria and sequences in case of suspicious? You need to see the clinic diagnosis has very unspecific, is very difficult to detect, especially for children who are at high risk, below 5 years of age, malnourished, HIV infected, or with any other immunodeficiency condition. We need to develop a good clinical history. That's our main tool to find a good diagnosis and be able to take into consideration the epidemiological data, clinical data, and in case biopsy, in case it's applicable. And also we need to remember that we need to have the phenotypical demonstration, genotypical demonstration. So we need to remember that in the clinical history, we need to type down all the anamnesis data. It may be on a specific variable, either very relevant for the diagnosis, particularly the exposition, fever for over a week, the loss of weight, or the trouble gaining weight, and cough for over 2 weeks. And also for the physical checkup, there's some information that may be useful, such as the loss of weight or the lack of weight gain, adenomegalias, or also investigating subacute meningitis. We should see the pleural effusion, situs, among others. And something that we should particularly consider about latent LTB, it's another challenge, a big challenge for everyone that has not been well addressed. And we consider there's about 3 billion people that are infected. And every year, 100 million people are infected, out of which 7.5 million are children in America. In America, children under 5, that are studied, whose contacts are studied and confirmed with LTB, as you can see, is about 16,000, and only 59% receive prophylaxis. In Mexico, for 2020, it says that there are 37 possible contacts have been identified, and they are examined at 80%. So in a child that there might be suspect of having LTB because he's been exposed, the most important thing is, as a main step, is to make sure that he doesn't have active, or they don't have active TB. That's the main thing, the first step. We need to make sure that they don't have active TB. And regarding the data that might lead us to a diagnosis, a more accurate diagnosis for TB, are the following criteria that are very essential and crucial because they're the more efficient and more frequent. This has been proven throughout around the world. It's been approved by the WHO and in different studies and trials that have been conducted. This cough for over 2 weeks, fever for more than 8 days. Sorry about that. The loss of difficulty for gain weight for 3 months, in the last 3 months, the lower activity or activity in the child, and lack of the willingness to play, and the history of being in contact with someone with TB. And now we have some diagnosis guidelines that are very recent, and they remind us that in children under 10 years of age with potential long TB, we can have some algorithms. This criteria cannot be just set in stone. Every country, they need to adapt them to their own situation. We need to remind some of the support sometimes for the diagnosis of TB. We have tuberculosis, which is, as you all know this very well. You all know what this means. In some countries, it's not being applied, but I think that it's still very important to be able to suspect, identify, and diagnose LTB. And this is also a very good support for the possibility of diagnosing TB as a disease in a patient. Regarding the egress, these are great because these are wonderful because this provides us some very valuable information, but we need to remember that in countries like ours, this cannot replace PPD. And what happens in many of our countries is that there is a way to do egress, but they're not affordable or accessible to everyone. So because there are some in very specific research centers or some urban centers, but not in rural areas. could possibly be more effective. So regarding other activity, we can have the thorax X-rays that are fundamental, especially if we suspect long TB, or might help us to make sure it is not an active TB. And AP and PA projections, remember, an X-ray, abnormal X-ray is not a diagnosis per se. And also an abnormal X-ray does not mean that they don't have TB. So we need to have other tag, and we have several MRI, among others. And so we can see how the regular X-ray, thorax X-ray, can be very useful when we identify zinc cavitations in the context of a girl who lived in a community with a lot of TB cases. So she was studied, and such as MRIs, that we can see the injuries here in the case of the vertebrae, or in the case of affirmation of other injuries, and the compressions and different lesions at different degrees. So it's very important to remember that there always need to propose a differential diagnosis. That usually TB has been known the great simulator, because it has different diagnosed symptoms, and it's also important to remind that TB, the mortality rate in young children is very high. So that's why we need to remember that we should not overdiagnose it, but definitely we don't want to underdiagnose it, because it's very important to have good diagnosis. So it's between the differential diagnosis, we need to identify if there is any comorbidity, such as pneumonia. There are many cases, and in the case of pneumonia, up to 17% of TB cases are detected, and they can be detected by a culture. And also, this increases, the mortality increases in the TB pneumonia cases. Obviously, malnutrition affects the risk of developing TB, serious TB. Okay, so in this data that was provided, Marta Angelica Garcia, I want to thank her, and also Dr. Cerzet for giving me these statistics. I want to remind you that the coexistence of TB in cases of comorbidities such as malnourishment, as you can see in purple and violet. We also see the house. We can see this in different age groups. And regarding the extrapulmonary TB, we see systemic manifestations that are very, very, very unspecific, and the clinical manifestations depend on the organ that is being affected, that the images are very valuable. And obviously, we are gonna try to use some microbiological studies, molecular studies, and other type of tests. And also, we need to remember that during the pandemic, we have seen covered cases of TB because of COVID. So we need to remember that there are in some cases, some symptoms that coincide, and they also are airborne. They're both airborne, and they develop systemic diseases, mainly in the air tract, and the higher risk of serious complications with COVID is also related to TB as a comorbidity. Why diagnosing TB in children is so challenging for everyone? Because of the immunological immaturity, the expression is very variable. The unnoticed primary infection, so we don't notice it. It's very quick, develops very quick. The extrapulmonary forms are very frequent in children. They have pausibacillary forms that are sometimes hard. The samples are very difficult, and patients with low confirmation rates. Expectoration depends on the age, and the pathology may affect on which organ is being affected. For instance, in Medellin, acute pneumonia. We had that it was up to 14% that were related to base pathologies, but the clinical criterion has a very high yield. If we applied it with a good judgment that we just proposed and following an algorithm for each one of the countries, and we can have a good yield of to 90%. In the case of Cali, where the startup of the diagnosis of symptoms and diagnosis is a period of 45 days, and the treatment is 99 days. So we cannot waste this much time. Regarding the diagnosis, lab diagnosis, what is always recommended is confirmation in children, but also we know that this is more difficult due to the low bacillus population and the specific clinics manifestations and all the different situations we just mentioned. So there are different ways to find tuberculosis bacillum, and then the genetic markers through the detection of the bacillus itself, its components, and the detection of the immune response. And also we have had great development with advancements in this since the last 139 years. We have seen how with the culture we managed to differentiate the different bacillus, and the sensibility tests in the last 40 years have been a huge step for everyone to be able to identify TB. But we need to also remind that these are limited studies due to the immunological complexity of bacteriolosis, and sometimes these are insufficient for diagnosis. Regarding the diagnostic assistance for infection and disease, we need to assess for the infection and latency. PPGs and IGRAS are very good tools. And for the disease, we have phenotypical tests, because cultures, typification and sensibility, histopathology, and genotypical tests and immunological tests that are usually molecular platforms with high yields that allow us to detect TB and other pathologies with great success. So I'm sorry if I give you a lot of information in all these slides, but I just want to remind you that genotypical tests, immunological tests, and molecular tests are very important. They have been revolutionary. They detect the tuberculosis complex of microtuberculosis, the sensibility to drugs, and this amplification test for nucleic acids. This is great because when we learn the nomenclature, we come up with some other acronyms about some other opportunities. So it's very important to keep all this in mind. Also, we have the possibility of measuring the sensibility to second-line drugs. Usually the most frequently used genus expert and genotype. And also we need to remember that there has been big steps taken towards the application. And in the last 11 years ago, the WHO would say that as expert should be initial test for diagnosis. In most of children that suffer from meningitis or they were suspect of other extrapulmonary conditions or drug resistance. And it could be used as an initial test for all children. In 2021, you can see here that it's highlighted that expert should be done for the national diagnosis of TB, replacing the other conventional tests. And expert ultra should be used as a national diagnosis for TB and drug resistance detection instead of phenotypical tests. So the practical recommendations is we need to keep in mind that it should be used for meningitis, both expert and expert ultra for those who have it. In case of extrapulmonary TB suspect, you can use the expert test, and it should be used for detecting drug resistance instead of the culture and phenotypical test. And in seropositive with TB, it could be used even in blood. But we should also remember that our countries, all these tests, extraordinary tests are not readily available in all the sites that are most needed. So I think it would be very important to first of all to keep in mind that we cannot just we can say there is no bacillus copy case without the cultures, but now the WHO recommends to take these samples, not samples, but to do this test. But also we cannot deny the possibility of being before a TB case unless we do some other efforts to diagnosis. We need to have the microscopy when there is no other option, and the culture. And obviously, when we have experts and so on, that would be great for children above 7 years of age. We can use spontaneous expectation. For children under 7 years of age, we can have nasopharyngeal aspiration and gastric leverage. So we will have also variability of samples, 2 out of 1, and 2 out of 1 type, and 1 of another type. We can take them for cephalorhynchitis liquid, in some cases, and cirrhosis liquid, and biopsies depending on the compromised organ. In the case of extrapulmonary tuberculosis, it will depend obviously on the organ, and as we know, in the many sites we have some imaging technologies. So we need to emphasize that after 139 years, despite all the wonderful new tests, still in many places, conventional microscopy is very important, and we don't have perfect tests. Some of them are fast, but due to bureaucracy, sometimes we don't get the results real quick, and also sensibility and specificity is not perfect. They're very valuable, but there is no one that is not 100% safe. And something is very important is to remember that today the WHO, when we cannot obtain proper samples with the bacteriological resources and molecular resources, then we can try to do this clinical diagnosis that we just proposed today. So regarding comprehensive healthcare for children and adolescents affected by TB, first of all, we need to prevent, and with the BCG, Dr. Álvarez will talk about this, preventive therapy, also the early detection of the disease, the indicated treatment, the schedule recommended, generally speaking, is 2-HRZE plus 4-HR to the proper doses, daily doses. And as you can see here, some of the big changes is that it became now it's as daily, and used to be every 2 or 3 months. So obviously, the administration of the supervised effective regimens, and also the search for infection and resistance, and the support for children, families, and the community to achieve adherence and healing and mitigation of poverty. So we know prevention is key for reducing the reservoir and the transmission and the opportunity to prevent the disease, and the cheapest intervention disregarding the preventive therapy, which is very important in children, infected children. It prevents the infection to those that are being exposed, the latent to develop the disease, up to 90%, and in high prevalence zones is a protective factor, and the effectivity is known that it lowers a little with time, especially in children with HIV. There are other alternatives, other options that you can see here listed. The most common is monotherapy with isoniazid daily for 9 to 6 months, depending on the country. And because we don't have time, I cannot go elaborate on all of them, but one of the biggest challenges to have a preventive therapy for children with drug-resistant TB. What's very important to remember is that in a trial that was done 119 contacts, 104 with LTB, it started with quinolones, and 89% completed the treatment. None of them developed TB, and those that do not accept the treatment, 20% develop MDR TB. As you can see in this X-ray, you can remember that in those who have LTB that does not go through preventive therapy, they may develop the disease. So what would be the therapeutical schedule for sensible TB? Well, as I mentioned, remember that children from 0 to 3 months, we need to establish the suspect and confirmation of due to the risk of dissemination risk, and also we need to adequate the dosage depending on the age of the baby and the weight and so on. So the schedules are usually used for HIV/TB children. They're very similar to the conventional schedule. So we need to remember that there are some recommended doses. As I said, there are recommended daily doses, but it's not an imposition. Each country will do what is best for them. In this case, for meningitis, TB, and osteoarticular schedule is being recommended 10 months. It's a 2-month schedule followed by 10 months of HR. So there are some options. I'm just mentioning a few very quick that there's been studied a short intensive regimen that it will include isoniazid, rifampicin, and pyramidine and intunamide, and it shows a good success in the treatment that eventually could be greater. We have identified that even the number of side effects is develops with this kind of regimens, but we understand that these are very preliminary work. So regarding the conventional presentations, remember that the side effects of administering several tablets and pills to children, and now we have combined doses drugs that fortunately I think are available in Mexico now, and there are some schedules that you might be very familiar with, and then they're have been published everywhere depending on the weight of the patient. Regarding short treatments, we need to remember there have been some proposals here and some important number of participants in the different sites around the world. There's been suggested is 8 months of rifampicin, isoniazid, pyranizine, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol for 9 weeks. So I don't think any country can adopt these schedules until we have more information regarding drug-resistant TB for childhood adolescents. They are the same guidelines that are followed for adults, but we need to remember for minors there are some limitations. I cannot elaborate on this because we don't have much time, but just to remind you that the main limitation is by age. So there are different schedules for children over 6 years of age and for the younger, and those for that from 3 to 6 years of age. So we need to remember that successful treatment in Mexico is about 78%. And to wrap up with, I want to remember that attention and prevention centered on mother, the newborn, children, and adolescents, and families in the community. It's given due to the military integration of care and prevention, the healthcare systems for patients with TB, LTB, TB/HB cases of MDR TB, providing psychosocial support without any discrimination, handling all the situations with the confidentiality and respect to human rights, programs with clinical staff and volunteers, social mobilization, and the search for funding and education to all the people involved in the situation, communication with the family, community work. And as Observer TV says, children should have the right to be taken care of with respect and without discrimination. I'm going to take one more minute. Let's remember that WHO considers that the spike on TB is due to the persistence of risk factors, particularly socioeconomic crisis, due to migration, the multiple perception, the fact that there is confection and resistance, the deficiencies in terms of prevention, and then in many cases public health has been taken down, and also the lack of attention to LTB, and obviously the COVID-19 pandemic that we know has made things a lot worse. So we have the main challenges for children TB. We need to include children in the clinical practice, in the public policies, and the research. We need to acknowledge the existence in children. We improve the prevention, diagnostics, and treatment for children and minors. We need to be able to have diagnosis tests. We should be able to develop shorter regimens to prevent LTB, control and treating co-infections and MDR TBs, increase biosafety, develop the most effective vaccine, and address social and family situations. Today, children should have the hope to live in a world where no one would have tuberculosis, no more death, no more crying. Children deserve something better. Time is up. It's time to end tuberculosis. I want to thank you, everyone. I apologize for speaking a little longer than I should have. Thank you so much. Thank you, doctor. So we have some time for questions from the public. I have a question right here.
Que nos hacen llegar.
Okay, doctor. What is the trend for child cases in Americas during the COVID pandemic? Yes, definitely. The impact has been great on this population. Right now, I don't have the data, but what the WHO estimates and the PHO also estimates is that detection has dropped case detection has dropped to 20 to 30% for TB during the pandemic. Why is it? Because you all know that people are afraid to go out. They don't want to go see the doctor. Vaccination has dropped too significantly. Also parents are not taking their children to the doctor's office for checkups and to receive the proper treatment. So there is a series of factors that come together to make things worse. I'm going to give an example in Colombia. Unfortunately, I couldn't see the latest data for Mexico, but I showed you the schedule that I see that how detection drops dramatically, and also the study for contact patients. And obviously, this has had a negative impact on the programs. In Colombia, early this year, detection had dropped to 32% of all the TB cases. At the moment, we have 328 cases, but we don't believe that that's because we are very good at controlling TB, because we have healed TB right on time. But it is because definitely there's this poverty that has been increased, all the lockdowns, they have had an impact. And obviously, we need to remember and highlight that experts say that TB programs, despite the high quality of such and the enthusiasm and the efforts from all the people involved, they have been taken back 10 years. We have traveled back in time 10 years, which is a lost decade due to the pandemic. And as I said, despite this great willing from everyone, there are so many social determining factors even political factors that are involved and play a role in this. Thank you, doctor, for your information. That these are very important. These are very important numbers.
Bueno, vamos a continuar con
Let's continue with the next speaker.
Lucia Álvarez Hernández.
Dr. Lucia Álvarez Hernández. Dr. Lucia Álvarez Hernández is specialist doctor for perinatal disease mortality. She is also a counselor for TB Control Board in the National Prevention Center and the Epidemiology Center in Mexico. She's also the head of children's and adolescents TB clinic. Thank you, doctor. I want to remind you that we have a countdown, so to keep that in mind. Thank you. Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you again. I was very pleased to see Dr. Magnolia. I send her all my regards and wish her a happy holidays. Okay, within this BCG vaccination, we have very important data. Okay, I'm going to show you the first slides. That contains the historic framework and the component of vaccination in Mexico City and around the world, and also the vaccine outlook and the efficiency of the BCG vaccination. Remember the tuberculosis world strategy. They have three main pillars that we know them as strategic tools to decide what to do to reach 2035 with better yields and better numbers for the world. So in the first line, we see attention and prevention, integrated prevention for TB center in the patient. See, in the last 25 years, almost 30 years, we have lots of things have been researched, and to develop a new vaccine for TB around the world. These guys will be very happy to see the launch of new vaccines will be start up. So they were pioneers from the last and this century and the one before. The first steps towards the vaccine that first was considered as they developed a diagnosis test, and then it was developed as considered a prevention tool. Dr. Álvarez, would you mind, please? Put your presentation in full screen mode. Yes. Is that better? Oh yeah, much better. Thank you. Okay, we have the dates 1882. We all know this. That's when it was demonstrated that the infectious disease. 1906. That's when the gold years for microbiology. They started studies for the possible vaccine with a bacillus recovered from a sick cow. And 1908 we have the first attenuation of the bacteria. And in 1921 we started vaccinating children. In 1924 we have some massive immunization of French children. And unfortunately, they were administered in very wrong doses, and there was a milestone for us, well, not in a good way, because we could learn from this experience. In Mexico, participated, as in many other vaccines for rabies, for measles, polio, and in this case, I had little participation in the first two TB trials. In 47, the Red Cross started massive vaccination, and in 88, WHO includes it as an immunization scheme. Today, It's applied in 152 patients in 25 of them. Only for risk population and coverage, it's about 66 to 89% in Mexico. The coverage was a good example, and it was a big pride for us in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, we have variable availability of the vaccine, so the vaccination has lowered. It was about 95%. And we have different prevention strategies, not only the vaccine. What happens with the vaccine? What's the immunological response? And why are there differences since it was released to the world? Okay, first, we have the dose due to the production process standardization around the world. Was a big problem, especially now there are differences in the production and the packaging and the transport, the conservation of vaccines. Obviously, there are some physical and biological changes in the bacillus, and we now from the original strain, we have seen differences, and we have been able to identify several genes that are missing in our vaccines. From the strain from 1921 to 1961, they had already identified some deletions of the length of the bases, and the Tokyo strain, a few polymorphism on nucleotides, and a couple bases were affected, and there was some injuries in some of the protein components. So right now we have this number of vaccines around the world, from the original one, the grandma from all vaccinations, the Denmark variant, the United Kingdom variant, and the one that might be the candidate to be used as a trial for new vaccines, Holland, Montreal, and Connaught strain that was very prevalent in Mexico City and in the whole country. We have, in terms of vaccination, this is the schedule that we follow for the vaccination. You know, in the US, in Canada, it's being only applied in some cases, and now with COVID, there are some populations, some of the staff, part of the staff of the healthcare population, they got the shot. Now it's being 400 billion vaccines have been applied, and over 200 million are applied every year. These are the vaccines that we have in the world. We have the presentation, the composition. In the case of the number of strains, we have a very interesting difference here. We can see how the Danish, the Tokyo, and the Moscow strains are, that we see differences. We can see also differences in the immunological response to the vaccinations of vaccines applied around the world. What's the vaccine technique or guideline in the pediatrical guidelines that we use? BCG, it said that is a doses of 0.1 milliliters intradermic application in the deltoid area of the right arm, and this allows us to have better results and better evaluation of the assessment of the vaccine. It's also being described that it can be applied in the right thigh. Efficiency differences. Okay, we could explain why there are some difference. There are different factors, ethnical differences and geographical factors. For almost 50 years, it's been published that people that live above the equator, they have a more acceptable response to vaccines. Possible reasons for this: geographic area, different distribution of microorganisms in different countries, and they might have an immunity generated by environmental criteria, and also children who have better feeding rates and the better nutrition, they present better response to to vaccines, especially those who have good protein intake. We need to remember that from the newborns to the children in school age and teenagers, there are different articles that say better response depending on the age. The standardization of a process of applying this vaccination at the month of age isn't started yet to because we're trying to address all the cases. Because people sometimes, we lose these patients, potential cases, because they don't come back for the vaccine. But there are some vaccines in some countries where the vaccine can be applied at a year of age, and some others cases it can be applied in school age. And some of them, they do a booster and the offset of adolescents. There are some different vaccine strains that have different responses depending on the region and the individual. The duration of the vaccine, depending on the projection since 1958 and to date, the average that has been achieved by the epidemiological statistics for TB behavior is 10 to 15 years. And some articles say that it is 20, some of those say 50, but the average is 10 years. So the factors that may have an impact on the efficiency, also the presence of microbacteria and environmental microbacteria. In Mexico, we have information regarding this, and we have some epidemiology for microbacteria, but some countries, they have better situations. Also, the genome changes in the original strain. They may develop deficiency in 30%, and due to the genetic evolution of that one, that has been changed since 1958. The doses, some article says that the doses for newborns is 0.05, and some others say 0.1. So I think it's very interesting because the positioning according to the position of the WHO, we will need to modify the initial doses. Our newborns receive 0.1 milliliters of doses in Mexico. So this will need to be looked at in the meta-analysis. The type of vaccine, the strain that it contains, the application technique, administration technique is very important. It's cutaneous, subcutaneous, intramuscular. But if it's wrongly administered, a child that may have some immunological condition that may affect, and also people with HIV, living with HIV. The applications, according to age per million of vaccinations, we have the lymphadenopathy, maybe a little in children under 1 year of age, the frequency is higher, the rate is high, and in children and people between 1 and 20 years of age, it's about 20%, 25 cases out of every million. We know when having adverse effects, and also this disseminated form, it's described, and now since we have more tools to identify immunodeficiencies, we can associate it with more efficiency and make sure it's not spread. An example, our example is a boy who was vaccinated and developed a systemic response, and it started from a BCG that was applied to a child that should not have gotten this vaccine. So who is this indicated is for children, newborns who weigh more than 2 kilograms and up to 14 years of age. And now we know that this BCG vaccine may have some potential immunological advantages and benefits. The national schedule, it says that it should be before the 3 months of age. It should not be administered in children or adults with the following diseases: compromised immunity with HIV, leukemia, many immunosuppression and pregnant women. What do we expect from this vaccine? We have two responses that we should look for, make sure that happens. We expect to see, because the purpose of vaccine is to develop, to cause a controlled infection. That is an infection of stimulation to the innate and adaptive immunity. Innate immunity develops on the palm by each person. Develops, protects against any agent that may enter the body, and it becomes more efficient every time it's stimulated. And adaptive immunity is specific. It has memory. Specifically, is in the cellular response, the THCD4 and the CD8 lymphocyte response are involved. The liberation of cytokines, and it's also responsible for late sensibility. What are the precautions? There's no indication. It's okay even if they suffer from measles and mumps or any other. It should not be applied in an area where there is rash on the skin. And if necessary, you can apply it and administer it in the other arm. We think that the best success is for children. I'm going to show you this as a review of the database for the epidemiology department in 2029. From year 2000 and 2009, we saw during this period, meningeal TB was, and from 0 to 95 years, about 444 cases. In the other chart, this is from back then. In 2017, we can see that these are substantial, significant examples that we have our immunization scheme has lowered. Yes, but we were expecting that this number from 2016 may have a good impact on children who are 5 years old today. We have lacked some policies regarding vaccination schemes. So this is the total national number. Here in the national numbers, we have some children and teenagers from 15 to 19 years of age that had TB. Here we can see, as I said, the 0 to 19 years of age. This is Dr. Marta provided this chart to us. That's for TB from 0 to 19 years of age. You see, the major concern is children under 5 years of age, and we have the same number of cases for between 10 to 14, and the numbers drop from 15 to 19. Efficiency. Since the vaccine was produced, the BCG efficiency in the last 50 years, when they wrote the first BCG chapters by Dr. Jesus Comate, a prominent immunologist. He said in controlled trials, randomized trials, that there were differences in the immunological response and the control of the disease. Yes, that's true, but now we have many more. The literature is amazing. And we're still trying to summarize that, yes, there's efficiency that lowers the risk of developing long TB. Some studies say that it's zero, some others say not so much, but it has a benefit. Efficiency does not modify the area of application, with the age of application. The evolution of vaccines, as I said, the literal deletions in the length of the bases, in this number of bases. This is the main, theoretically speaking, the main hypothesis on why we have different immune responses to this. polymorphism in the nucleotides, and the modification of some of the genome and the proteins. In 1998, it was identified and published the sequencing of the genome sequencing of the proteins. MTV has billions, millions of bases, pair of bases, 4,000 different proteins. That some of them have been identified that have changed, and this might be a good source for investigation in the future. We need to, when acknowledging the genome, we come up with new research on more efficient diagnosis methods. The change in the genome have been studied for the vaccines, for the future vaccines. So this is a trial that was conducted by people in China in an impressive production of molecular production. What I want to show you here is the strains around the world, from the Philippines, Prague, China, the one in the US, the Thais strain, and in Mexico, we had one. And this number we have here is a number of possibilities of attaining the genome the closest to the original strain. The Tokyo has the one with the best behavior, and it still has many of the components of the original vaccine. It might be the most important for the next vaccination generation of vaccinations, because it contains the most important antigens that might be immunogenic. So this is since the very beginning. Since it was first applied, there have always been controlled trials that have proven the epidemiological success of the vaccines. In Peru, they have a lot of experience on TB, is associated, and they published this document where they identify the benefit of BCG vaccination in hospitals in Peruvian patients. This was published in 2012, and this article is a randomized trial, and has two groups: the control group and BCG group. And as the fundamental proposes to identify the immunity in school children, school-aged children. So this was the number of children that were vaccinated. There's a control group, and then the BCG group, we have 20,000. We have to follow up to 5 years on the first group and 4 years from the second group. And the first group, but they were vaccinated, the percentage of people infected with TB were higher, and those that had to be stopped at 4 years of follow-up, they had lower rate of infection in school-aged kids. Other evidence point out that suggests that there are many, but in neonatal babies, infants, this is a 2 meta-analysis. I'm gonna leave the presentation for you to check it out later. In newborns and school-aged children, the numbers might be different for school-aged children for some meta-analysis, but the differences are not so large, not significant, not very significant. On the second trial, different 7 controlled case control trials, and you can see at the lower we don't have a positive response. Some other articles, the same article with different perspective, and here they talk about good response in newborns and good response in school-aged children. And here in the Lancet 2006, we have a significant reduction on meningitis, tuberculosis. And this chart published in 2014, different studies done in different trials in different parts of the world. I want to show you the difference, protective BCG among children that have been vaccinated and those who have not. Those who have been vaccinated have better numbers want to show you fundamentally the non-vaccinated. If you see vaccinated, non-vaccinated, it would be possibly not a big difference in this line. But if you look at this here, between the vaccinated and non-vaccinated, quantiferon diagnosed. And this diagnosis method helps us identify which are the numbers that are protected, those people that are not. And definitely vaccines have a good impact. And for the active infection, I want to show you here how for active TB, we saw differences in patients with BCG and those who were not vaccinated. For infection, well, we cannot make a big difference. And for infection to active TB, yes, and then we can see differences here. And this one is a little blurry, but also the incidence of long TB in vaccinated people with BCG. So there's a difference here. This is a Georgia school study. It says it's okay, but in some other trials in the US, they announced that there is a positive response to long TB in some of the research done back then. Incidence of long TB in BCG vaccinated patients. We see the newborns, school-aged children with previous PPD and those without PPD, and other ages with PPD, previous PPD, and other ages without PPD. We see the newborns, the pulmonary incidence is definitely very good. The protection is very good, and also for school-aged children, they separate here the numbers are. And now we have non-PPD school-aged children, and then this tells us that they could be applied. It could be the BCG could be applied directly. The incidence of meningeal and miliar TB in BCG vaccinated patients is the exact same thing that we saw in the previous slides. We see that BCG reduces the risk of catching the infection and dying. So this was the result of an analysis when there is no BCG. There was no BCG in many countries. There was an article published by an Australian group where they stopped applying BCG because of a scarcity of the vaccine, so the coverage lowered, and they used in this region. We can see the BCG protecting factor, and they had to make an adjustment in the application, and they themselves, they reflect on this, what happened after they stopped applying BCG as a part of their routine immunization scheme. So in a few years back, they identified the need of developing a new vaccine to prevent long TB, and they started working on this and trying to find the best vaccine that was effective, cheap, with no adverse effects, could be applied to all the population with those immunocompromised, and had been trialed with more safety standards. So here we have many vaccines that are being working on. Now there are new challenges. Some of them are effective, and some others are safe, and they're working on this. You can check this website for more information. And I'm gonna tell you about the more important vaccines that are being worked on. The German group and also includes some Spanish scientists that are working on this, on developing new vaccines. The Kaufman group They have been working on this for several decades, and they are focusing on developing a vaccine that are derived from the BCG. So the development of the vaccines, we should be recombining with microbacterial antigens, and they should have recombining proteins of MTB. So this is a series of vaccines that were available about, I don't know, 10, 15 years that were trialed, and this was the most promising one. This MVA, and there were some trials in teenagers, and it was canceled. So the new vaccines should target prevention of the infection, mainly in newborns, trying to replace the one that is being currently used, prevent post-exposition LTB or BCG history, and a booster for adults and teenagers. Therapeutical effect means with patients that may develop TB or to relapse on chronic patients. So this is the same phase. And out of this, we have these two. There's a group that is working in Spain, and there's a group that is working in Germany, along with the US. We have two more that are the more promising. The one that is about 85pp was suspended, and this vaccine is BCG based. The genes of the vaginal bacillus escape the endosome, and their antigens are processed by and presented by T cells, and that's how we get immunization. These are the two more promising vaccines. Well, there's a lot of people working on this, Dr. Klugman, and those that are interested in epidemiology and the generation of new vaccines. They believe this is the center for the first vaccination. We start here at newborns, and we need to boost the immunization at this age. So it'll be more targeted to these two age groups. So this is the one this was going very well, but it was dropped. This one is pending. It might be a booster, as well as Kurman. They have interest conflict because there's a fundamental part of one of those. So Estrolithin, that's this one right here, that is going very well. This one might go to the next trial stages. We just mentioned the age groups where we need the vaccines in newborns and teenagers. This is an example of the vaccine effect that had been administered by spray-administered vaccines. They have been used in animals. When I starting BCG, they were thinking about oral administration or parenteral administration, but there are many incidents. But in the trials with mice, we saw that inhale administration lowers the possibility of finding bacillus in the lungs. So this one was discarded. This was the group that was working on this. This is one of the vaccines that was very pleasant for us to believe that it was one of the vaccines we're going to be able to start applying on children above the age of 3, but we had a problem, identified a problem in children older than 5 years and older. So there's this new vaccines from between 2015 and 2017 is this attenuated vaccine, has been proven to be safe and efficient. It's in the Spanish group. They were as efficient as BCG. It was applied in a project with newborns in South Africa. We escalated to increase the age groups for teenagers and adults. So they are still working on this, supporting these vaccine projects significantly. we need better vaccines and better prospects. And while we don't have that, we're going to keep on using BCG. But there are some other prevention measures. Treating patients, identifying cases, and doing contact cases, contact studies, and so on. Having these contact studies is very important so we can identify the source case. Otherwise, we're not going to stop. We need to remind the position of the WHO is to apply in regions with high TB incidence, or in countries where they have since 1958 in many countries they started paying close attention to CPG. And also need to consider whether it can be used also for addressing leprosy in some countries. But countries with highest incidence may choose to vaccinate or newborns in high risk. The schedule is single doses at birth, and each country may have to adapt the schedule depending on their own needs. The co-administration is with other vaccines is safe. Today we don't need a boost, but in my opinion, I think that after living so many years, dealing with tuberculosis for so many years, I think it would be good maybe in the future we might need a boost for school-age children, considering the numbers of cases we're seeing among the teenage population and adult population. And also very important that they do it in Australia, and they also do in many of the programs to evaluate the program. The immunization schedule should be assessed depending on the attachment to the guidelines of each country, the observance of the guidelines in each country. They need to be standardized as much as possible. But so they come up with an assessment of their own schedule, identify possible areas of opportunity. Among those was an important challenge to identify the supply and process of vaccine procurement is very important. There's some differences in the jurisdiction program with the PNV. They're very unconnected. The age, some people, they have different age ranges. There is no adverse effects. It generates a good tool for the management of the situation. They issue recommendations improving the procurement process and delivery of vaccines, as well as unify the process of jurisdiction and with the national vaccination program, and improve the rate of vaccination. So another uses of BCG, they became very fashionable to vaccine people in order to prevent the death rate for people who catch COVID. And there are some articles that said the countries that have that are vaccinated regularly with BCG, they have less mortality rates. Well, we need to observe that. But also, my cause, macrophagus, entrainment, and other cells. It protects against other infections. It has been described since 1988, and there's nothing new. It increase the response to other vaccines, improve the immune anti-tumor response. In conclusion, the vaccine is a resource to avoid catastrophic complications. We should not forget this. While we don't have any other vaccine, we're going to keep on using BCG. Let's vaccinate our children and try to rescue children that were not BCG vaccinated. So it's very important for all of us to have our micro world to support the application of this vaccine in time, the right time. Thank you.
Que nos proporciona a este foro.
Thank you, Doctor. All the information you provided was very interesting for all of us. We have a few questions for you. I can see you. I can see you on the screen. How can I see you? I'm gonna ask you a question. Okay, the first question is, if a person BCG vaccinated that is not infected, what is the result after PPD administration? It's going to have a positive or negative effect. If a person is BCG without PPD, it's administered BCG. I don't understand the question. A person who was BCG vaccinated that is not infected, that is not TB positive, what's going to happen to that person if PPD is applied? It's going to have a reactive response or not? Okay. Since 1960 something, articles were published saying that we didn't have to apply PPD for BCGs. If you remember that, if I apply BCG, is to protect. I can use BCG for diagnosis. I think that's what they are trying to ask. But if I apply BCG and the person is not sick, you shouldn't have an accelerated reaction. A person who has the TB infection and BCG is applied that is not quantified may have an accelerated reaction and develop a node in the first 7 days. And if it's not infected, it's not sick, it won't have a reaction beyond the what's expected, the scarring on the shoulder. So applying BCG, if you want to use it as a diagnosis, if it's hyperreactor or if it's accelerated response, so it is in the first 7 days. So the child was already infected, and we need to follow the protocol to make sure it's not active TB case. I think, that's kind of the question. Yeah, in your experience, in the disseminated BCG cases, what are the risk factors that you have identified? Yeah, this is an alteration on the monocytes in the interleucin 12, zero gamma, immunodeficiencies associated with some innate metabolism disorders, and also incest. Today, that's what I have confirmed myself in my own experience, but it's also published. So it's important, very important, to see the clinic history. If you have a good clinic history, you're not going to miss all those details. That's why it's very important to have a new perinatal medicine. If I have a very good clinic history, and then I tested the mother for hepatitis, BRL, and HIV, I'm going to know that I should not vaccinate that child. So that's why it's so important to work on that. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. We have some questions for Dr. Arango.
La escala de Stengen y Toledo.
The Stengen scale and Toledo scale, are they still useful? Functional? Yes. I had the chance when I started in Mexico to get familiar with the Toledo scale. Probably it was very valuable. It was a great contribution back then. But according to the WHO and the PHO, these scales should not be applied in this regard, because if a child comes to a site where there is a lot of the healthcare staff is well trained, they're going to ask the rest questions, and they are going to get a high score that might make you think that the child suffers from TB. But if the child comes to a place where the people just provide basic healthcare services, or the healthcare staff is not well trained to detect or to ask the rest questions, we might miss that. We might miss a detection. So those scales, and not only the Dr. Toledo scale, those scales are not very advised. It's not, and what the WHO is recommending, and that's why included in the slides. I think that amplified the criterion that it was of considering and you coming up with algorithms in different national programs. In Colombia, we have an algorithm that includes the signs or the keys to suspect TB, a fever of over for more than 8 days, the tiredness, loss of weight, hard to gain weight, difficulties for gaining weight, and also living in a high incidence area. But in conclusion, like you say, I know in Mexico they used that scale a lot, very frequently. I don't know if they're still using it. When I did my PhD there, it was very well used, very popular. We all remember Dr. Toledo, who was a great figure in medicine, Mexican medicine, but right now it's not recommended. Okay, thank you, Doctor. Another question for you. What are the main side effects for children with active lung TB, and what are the corrective, well, it's a very difficult question, and actually the degree of the side effects, it will depend on the child and on the condition, the physical condition of the child when TB is detected. Now we consider there are some TB forms that are not serious at a lung level, and most likely that we start treating early in the early stages with the child, there's not going to be any side effects. But the child comes in late stages of disease with more dissemination in the lungs, especially some with cavitations. So most likely may have some after effects. And the degree of those effects, well, it will depend on what was the condition of the child when they came. So to prevent this, they recommend the use of some drugs in case of the child has some ameliorate compromise in the lung. They use steroids. And in the case that there is adenopathies in the bronchia, then that's recommended. We all know that there's some. So what I have observed throughout these years and all my years of working in this area is that usually children do not have any after effects or consequences. The cavities and pulmonary fibrosis might be observed in some cases. Okay, thank you, Doctor. Another question for you, Dr. Magnolia. They were asking us if in Colombia, what's administration you use for the drugs? Because I don't know if it's an injection, or tablets, because we know that in children is very hard. So what are the recommendations for the first contact healthcare providers for the administration of this? Now we have the sprays in the last 6 years, and that's been made things a lot easier to administer these drugs to children, because we have some charts that allow us to say, okay, depending on the weight of the child, it depends on how many tablets they can take. But we know that after 25 kilograms, they need doses administrations for adults. We have the spray administration method for adults and for teenagers, and we have had great experience with this. The only problem we have seen is the chambutol is not coming the administration method, so it had to be administered separately. So it would be great if it could be applied at the same time on the tablet. They are very well tolerated. They are very well accepted by children. They can be given with any complications. In contrast with how nurses and doctors, they had to struggle trying to get all the children to swallow different pills I don't know, we try to put them in a juice or some dessert, and now you're now injecting aminoglycosides. I mean, practice that's not done anymore. Now, the dispersible tablets are available now. I think that in Mexico it's available become available in the last months, and then it's gonna be spread. They use the primary level. Some countries that have not procured them and they are not using them, but I think it's gonna become more and more popular. It's not spray, it's dissolvable tablets. Okay, Dr. Álvarez, regarding the BCG vaccines, I know it's being used in Mexico, but what have been the barriers of why people stop vaccinating children with this vaccine? You're muted.
Miren,
Yeah, doctor. The consistency and the continuity of immunization schedule has a lot to do with public policies, with money. So it's not that we stopped vaccinating. No, the thing is we didn't have a chance to do it. There was no way we could do it. You know, the pandemic might seem like the justification for everything. It's an excuse for everything because BCG coverage in the last 2 years, it's been very concerning. And we're told that now we have the vaccine availability. It was 8 months ago that they told us that they were available. First, when the availability and the people need to be aware of the application and the need to get this vaccine. And also the population, you know, they were afraid of leaving their homes. Almost the 2 million children that were born during this time, we need to rescue them. Okay, Dr. Álvarez, regarding the trials that we could use, or the studies that we can use for diagnosing TB children at first level doctors. I mean, they need to come up with good clinical stories. You need to learn to ask the right questions. A good doctor should be able to identify the epidemiological data and clinical data of every patient. That's why children have died in Chihuahua, Tabasco, in Chiapas, in Tlaxcala, because they do not do a right checkup and they don't ask the right questions. And for the lab environment, yes, the expert, that's great. Yeah, you identified a child, you can say a subacute case. So go ahead, do the test and start treatment. Don't wait for the results of the test. I have said this many times in the past. Start the treatment right away. What about contact study? Oh yeah, it's very important. It's very important. In the report I made, the study case 10 years ago, it was 30%. So all children said, no, the meningitis child is not infectious, but now I was in touch with someone else about 6 months ago. They had contact with other people. So we need to do that. The vaccine is not everything. Obviously not. We need to work on a daily basis as clinicians, as doctors, as healthcare providers. We need to work with all the patients around us, as Mr. President in 2019 said. The Ramburis get sick because they are hungry. And he's true. He's right. He's true. That's true. He's right. I mean, come on. Of course they are hungry. So thank you, Dr. Álvarez, Dr. Arango, for your participation in this forum.
Información muy interesante y de
lots of information, very interesting and valuable information for all of us that are here that deal with our patients and patients infected with TB. Thank you so much. Can I say something? Yeah. Just once again, I would like to thank everyone all the organizers for this forum. I think it's wonderful because it's not only broadcast streamed across America, but it's also is taken to different to all the different levels of attention. So it's very important to detect cases of TB in children in the first contact with healthcare providers. So we think we only see tuberculosis as a childhood situation, but no, it's something that may affect patients throughout their lives. So I want to thank Dr. Álvarez for her presentation and all the organizers for this forum, because I think it's very important for the entire continent. And I think that together with all the different academic organizations and the authorities, health authorities, this is the biggest chance we have to spread this concept. And we should be able to understand that this is not an issue for specialists. It's not, you don't have to be a pediatric pneumologist to be informed about this. No, everyone should be informed about this. We should be educated on TB to be able to identify TB in children. Thank you, Doctor. Especially, we should keep that in mind. We should also suspect that and remember that it's still around. So thank you both. I want to thank the Center of Studies, Study Center for CEPA, under the interpreters for the English language. I want to remind everyone to sign in with a QR code to make sure that you're recorded in the list. Thank you, everyone, for and we'll be waiting for you on the sixth session for this forum. Dr. Oriol Murin, he is in the clinic of TB for TB with the practical guidelines for the interpretation of molecular sensibility, and Dr. Jordi Torrelles, who is in Texas Research Institute in Texas, US, and he'll be talking about influence of the human lung mucosa of microbacterial tuberculosis infection form. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much.